guys, I'm here today to talk about 7 more books I DNF'd over the last few months. I'm going to start with a couple of the big hitters that I know lots of you love and lots of you may be disappointed at me for DNFing. Firstly, we have the Overstory by Richard Powers. So, I was sent this when it first came out from the publishers. I don't know if I'd have picked it up myself, in all honesty. And it's an odd one because there's so many elements of this book I should love. I love books about the natural world with a real focus on nature writing. I love books with multiple character perspectives, and I love books that are set across a large section of time. And the Overstory has all those elements. And so many people over the last few years have commented on my videos and said, oh my god, you have to read the Overstory if you like nature books, you'll really love it. And I just always felt like maybe I wouldn't. I just had this feeling that it just wasn't going to be my type of writing. And so I finally decided to give it a go. And I didn't read all that much, to be honest. It's a very chunky book, as you probably know. I read the first couple of chapters, which is maybe like 40 pages, and then I wasn't enjoying the writing style at all. So I decided to flick through and read like snippets here and there throughout the rest of the book to see if once you got further in and got to know the characters a bit more, I would prefer the writing style. And I just really didn't. I felt like it felt a bit dry and separate from the characters, and it felt like he wanted to focus on a really large encompassing thing, being, you know, the life cycle of trees, and in doing so he sort of distanced himself from the characters, and he was almost writing it as though it was sort of an epic. And I'm not really a fan of that because it feels to me like the characters aren't real people, like we're being held at a distance. So I just don't think Richard Powers' writing style is for me at all. I was completely unimpressed by all the sections I read from the book, and I will not be reading the Overstory or any of his other books. And the next one, Station 11 by Emily St John Mandel. So, obviously I had loads of people talk about this for many, many years, and it was one of those books I always thought, oh, I do need to give that a go because I do quite enjoy dystopian books. But what always put me off is that I knew we were following a sort of troupe of Shakespearean actors during, like, I don't know, this dystopian world. I don't want to call it the apocalypse, but this virus has spread which has killed the vast majority of humanity, and people are living in separate bands, and this group of people travel to perform Shakespeare across North America. And I loved the first chapter. I really enjoyed the writing style. It opens as the virus is then hitting, and you follow this stage play of, I can't remember which Shakespearean play, can't remember which one, and then you follow a man who is realising what's happening, and he's trying to get supplies to his brother in like a high-rise apartment. And I really liked those characters. I liked the immediacy of those chapters, and I was really hoping to stay with those people. And then it just jumps many years to when the pandemic has killed most people, and we're following this group of, like I said, this travelling band. And I just didn't care. There was a lot of names, a lot of people. I found all their conversations boring. I didn't find it interesting. It was like easy enough to read, but there was nothing. This is one of those books where I read it and I think there's absolutely nothing special about her writing style. It's just, it's serving its purpose, it's doing the job, but it's not exciting me. And then they got to this place where there was this sort of like cult type vibe, and it felt a little bit like tropey to me. Like, we have this dystopian world, of course we're going to have people who build themselves up to be like this religious like messiah almost. So yeah, I just wasn't intrigued by any of it, and I didn't care for any of the characters, and I started to find quite a lot of the people annoying. So I gave up about halfway through. Then I got about 100 pages into The Windrush Betrayal, Exposing the Hostile Environment by Amelia Gentleman. And this may be a case of me not really doing my research enough. So you may not have heard of any of this if you're not British, so I'm just going to quickly go over this. We had the Windrush ship, which came in, I think, late 1940s, early 1950s to the UK from the Caribbean, after we asked lots of people from the Caribbean that were then part of the British Empire to come to help their mother country to rebuild after World War II. Lots of those people were immediately given citizenship. They were given British passports because they were already part of the British Empire, so they, you know, they were already British citizens. But several years ago, Theresa May, our then Prime Minister, was in charge, although supposedly unaware, when lots of people who had been here since they'd come on the Windrush ship, or were children of people who'd come on that ship, or others around that time, were told they did not have valid British citizenship, and lots of them were put in effectively like detainment centres. They were basically prisons, while they tried to find documentation to prove that they'd been born in the UK, and like nothing was good enough. Like some of these people provided like 100 documents, interviews with their primary school teachers, their priests, photos of them in every stage of their life in Britain, but because they were missing like perhaps a birth certificate or like the stamped passport they were given back in 1950, they were told, you know, you can't prove any of this. And it became known as the Windrush scandal, the Windrush Betrayal. And Amelia Gentleman was one of the journalists who was at the forefront of uncovering this. She interviewed lots of the people who were being detained and were being told they were going to be sent back to the Caribbean. In particular, a lot of them were from Jamaica. And I was really interested in learning more about this, and so I picked this book up. And I guess my issues is that Amelia Gentleman is a white journalist. I'd rather hear this story firsthand, and also I felt this is obviously written by a journalist, and I would just rather it's a super easy read, it's really readable, but I felt like I wasn't really picking up much more than I already had from, you know, reading some interviews, watching some stuff on TV. So I didn't feel like it was in depth enough. So I think that's my fault, because I like to read, I guess, just slightly more meaty non-fiction, and I felt like this wasn't. And then when I was sort of looking into reviews, I saw that a lot of people had said that Amelia Gentleman is actually married to, I think, Boris Johnson's brother, and they're a very conservative family, and it's all a bit you know, convenient that she doesn't really acknowledge any of that during the book. So I decided to DNF this one as well. Then another non-fiction is Bleeker House, Chasing My Novel to the End of the World by Nell Stevens. You may remember, I think much earlier this year, I read Mrs. Gaskell and Me by Nell Stevens, which was a weird blend of non-fiction, sort of memoir, and fictionalised account of Elizabeth Gaskell's life. And Bleeker House is sort of the same odd mix. I got about halfway through this on audio until I felt like banging my head against a wall, and so I gave up. And it was really frustrating, because sometimes when you get halfway through an audiobook, or when I do at least, and it's only like an 8 or 9 hour book, you just think, for God's sake, like if I could just listen to these last few hours on like double speed, then it's another book I can mark off on Goodreads and I've not wasted my time. But I just couldn't make myself do it with this one. I was really not enjoying it. I had so many issues. So Nell Stevens, she went to university, and part of her degree, when she was studying English literature, I think, or creative writing, something like that, was that they were allowed to spend a certain portion of time going anywhere in the world in order to write, to be inspired to write, and to spend time whilst they were there writing. And so rather than go somewhere where there would be lots of like culture and communities that she could, you know, get absorbed in and come up with lots of ideas, she decided to go to one of the most uninhabited places on the planet, which is Bleaker Island, which is part of the Falkland Islands. And she like awfully planned for it, which I found really annoying. She barely took enough food or resources. When she got there was like fuck all people living there. She's really like depressed and hungry. So that irritated me, just like the immaturity of it, that she'd not really thought it through, that the sole reason for choosing Bleaker Island was that it sounded cool and unique because she was going somewhere so bizarre. But other than that, she didn't really have any plans. I think she hoped it would force her to write, but it doesn't really. So then, because the point in going there was to write a novel, and in fact what she does is sort of darts around writing some short stories and then some sections of a novel, and doesn't actually come away with anything, she then pieces together those bits and pieces that she wrote, the fiction bits, around a memoir of her time on Bleaker Island, and then it got published as this book. So it's boring, depressing, annoying stuff about her being on Bleaker Island, and then not very well written like short story sections from a novel. I particularly didn't enjoy the fiction that was included. It felt really tropey and sort of like 90s in that for a woman, she's really bad at writing female characters. They were all just serve the purpose of telling the story of the sort of leading man. And yeah, I just didn't like any of it, so DNF'd it. And then we have another book which is quite popular on BookTube at the moment, and that is Kim Jiyoung, born 1982. That is written by Cho Nam Joo and translated from the Korean by Jamie Chang. This is literally a it's me and not the book thing. As I said in part 1 of this video, which I'll link up here somewhere, I have a real issue with books where you are held at an emotional remove, where the narrative style is quite cold and disconnected, and this is exactly what this book is. It is the story of a typical woman growing up in South Korea, and it's her life, but it's almost written as though it's this factual account. It includes like real reference statistics, and for me, I completely get what this novel is trying to achieve, and I think it's brilliant. I think it serves its purpose. I know that it's like a massive thing in South Korea at the moment, and it was like loads of people who were reading it, who were famous people online, were getting lots of hate because it really does show how sexist South Korean culture is. So I know it's a super important book, but for me, I would just so much rather read a non-fiction account of what it's like to live as a South Korean woman, because when I'm reading fiction, I want to feel emotionally connected, and I can't do that when it feels like I'm reading a non-fiction book. So yeah, didn't work for me. And then one that I got about 80 pages into, I think, is the Unpassing by Chia-Chia Lin. I actually asked my library to buy a copy of this much earlier this year, and I got the copy in about a month or so ago, and so I was the first person to receive it. And I'm still really happy that I gave this one a go, because I think it could have been a book that I would absolutely love. So this is set in Alaska, and it's about a family of Taiwanese immigrants who are growing up in a really remote part of Alaska. And the novel opens, I think this is set in like the 1980s, the novel opens with one of the children contracting meningitis and then passing it on to his sister. And then when he wakes up a few days later, recovered from the meningitis, he finds out that his younger sister has died. And you follow the family story from there, how the parents are coping and how the children are sort of trying to build this new life. It's beautifully written, it's really evocative, the nature writing's really wonderful, so they go and spend lots of time outside, and the writing of that was again really beautiful. And there were segments that I enjoyed, but again, I just felt that all these characters were being held at an emotional remove. I felt really detached, and I shouldn't have done, because it's so emotional and so devastating. And I think in part it was intentional, because all these characters feel really siloed off from one another. They're struggling to connect after what's happened to their daughter or their sister. But I just couldn't engage, I just couldn't enjoy it because of that. So I read lots of reviews of people who said that that continued throughout the novel and they just couldn't connect to it. I also read lots of really positive reviews, so I would still recommend this book if it sounds interesting to you. I just couldn't get on with it. The last book I want to talk about is A Big Ship at the Edge of the Universe by Alex White. This is the first in a sci-fi space opera series. I'm not sure how many books there are going to be. And I read the first like 20 pages and absolutely hated this one. This just isn't for me. I do not like fast-paced, action-packed books, and God was this first chapter fast-paced and action-packed. I picked this up because I thought it sounded a bit similar to The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, which I really loved. And I've barely read any sci-fi, and the reason I struggle with choosing sci-fi to read is that so much of it sounds really fast-paced. And that's just not what I want to read. I either get recommended stuff that's really fast-paced or quite dated, and I don't really know if I want to go into the realm of reading like older sci-fi, because I just find there's lots of like gender stereotypes there that I'm not loving. So I'm struggling to find my place with sci-fi, so do please feel free to recommend me some books. But yeah, this one opened with this sort of big space race, and partway through the race there is a sort of crash, collision, explosion thing, and then this big scary creature appears and like murders one of the racers, and it has this really lame name, and I just thought it was described not well and didn't love it. The descriptions were all really like over the top. This felt a bit like when I read some fantasy YA and you get told like exactly what everybody looks like, exactly what their hair's like, and exactly what they're wearing within the first paragraph of meeting them, this felt very much like this. Very much telling rather than showing. So yeah, didn't love it, got rid of it, won't be reading any more of the series. So that ends the big stack of books I DNF'd over sort of spring and summer. I have DNF'd one more book since then, so let's hope there aren't too many more DNFs between now and the end of the year, although I don't mind DNFing books, so I don't really mind either way. If I do DNF enough, I will do an end of the year DNF wrap up so you can see me talk about those ones as well. Let me know if you tried any of these books, if you had similar feelings to me or different, I'd be interested to know, and also feel free to recommend me books that don't sound like any of these ones. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!